Podcast, episode number 37. That's 37. We've got a lot of these now.
We're
And
doing our best.
yeah, and this is Erica Isaacson, soon to be working at Deloitte Digital as a front-end developer, and Danny Blue.
Hey, everybody.
And we have two guests today to talk about the Ghost blogging platform, and that is John O'Nolan and Hannah Wolf.
Hello.
So can you guys tell us a little bit about the project and how it got started?
Definitely, yeah. It's been going for almost 2 years now. In fact, I think the end of this month is the 2-year anniversary of the Kickstarter campaign. But originally it was kind of born out of me doing tons of work with WordPress over the last couple of years, or better part of 10 years, I guess, and building a lot of blogs for different companies, and then eventually contributing to WordPress itself as the deputy head of design for a couple of years. And slowly but surely becoming more and more frustrated by using WordPress to build a blog, because it got much, much easier to use WordPress to build a business website and a company website, but to actually manage authors and editors and do things with publishing, starting to clearly become not the focus. So it all started when I put together this crazy little blog post idea with a couple of mock-ups for how I would build WordPress if I were to rebuild it today and think about it from scratch. And that got quite a strong reaction, so took it to Kickstarter, and 2 years later, here we are. I guess that's the extremely short version of the story.
Yeah, and it definitely sounds like it's taking WordPress back to what WordPress originally was, because WordPress was originally supposed to be a blogging platform, and then more people started to use it to, like you said, build websites. So it sounds like you're kind of going back to the basis of what it was originally built to be.
Yeah, that's kind of it. I think WordPress never really had a vision. Obviously, WordPress was actually a fork of another open source project called V2, and that was originally the very first blogging platform which was created. And when that project kind of fizzled out and got abandoned, Matt Mullenweg forked it, called it WordPress, took it over, and started up this whole new development community. And there wasn't a big end goal or end game for what they wanted to do with it. They just wanted to see B2 not die and continue to live. So WordPress very much kind of evolved with user demand, which is a great thing, because that's how they've managed to get so many different people and such a diverse user group using it. But it's always been a platform for everything rather than for one specific thing. I think that's probably the biggest difference between the start of WordPress and the start of Ghost.
Yeah, and even on the website for Ghost is ghost.org, and the first thing you see is just a big tagline that says "just a blogging platform."
That is right.
So how is blogging today versus like blogging back in the early days of WordPress different?
Oh, that's a tough one. In many ways, it's exactly the same. In many ways, it's completely different. The biggest similarity, which I think carries on throughout any type of technology change or medium change, is the idea of long-form written content. That seems to be a constant that's just not going to go away anytime soon. No matter what technology does, humans always have a desire to read stories and read information. Then the parts where it's changed the most is probably in the distribution. That's obviously the most massive change we know of. Back in the early days of blogging, RSS was like the most crazy, new, amazing distribution technology ever, and now you almost wouldn't consider subscribing to a blog via anything other than Facebook or Twitter. So there's probably the biggest changes. Then there's a few smaller ones like embedded media, some more fanciness with what you do with different editors. So it's an evolution rather than a revolution, I think.
And as far as like the user experience, right? You were noted for having this dual pane where you could see, you write Markdown and then it shows on the right, so you get this instantaneous look, which I guess at the time was not something that we saw a lot. And there was, as far as like technical pieces of the user experience, what were the challenges there?
All sorts. I think the hardest part was probably trying to come up with new conventions, new ways of doing things that have already been done many, many, many times. That's always a tough thing. And then learning along the way why certain things didn't work for other platforms, and you sort of learn the lessons that other people have clearly already learned. So there were a couple of UI conventions which were complete failures throughout the beginning of Ghost to where it is now. A really obvious example of that was at the very beginning we had this little post settings menu, which was basically like a drop-down menu, which had 3 options. And then so the second we wanted to add any other kind of concept of post setting, we had nowhere to go because drop-down's not really extensible. It can support sort of a text field or a button, but that's about it. So as soon as people wanted like custom metadata for SEO or different options, things to do with their post, there was no way to extend that. So we quickly figured out that UI convention was just going to go nowhere, and now have changed it over to a kind of panel that comes out from the right, works way better on mobile, which drop-downs don't, and allows a variety of UI elements to be contained. So it's been a case of kind of reinventing the wheels a couple of times, figuring out which ones were good reinventions, which ones were terrible ones, but overall pretty interesting journey to say the least.
So you said more usable on mobile. Do you guys know of a large user base for mobile? I mean, obviously people reading the blog, but reading the blogs that are created with Ghost. But do you see a lot of people using the mobile editing tools?
On the creation side, it's not massive at the moment. It's one that's growing. It's like kind of the rest of the entire mobile web industry, I guess. It's not necessarily that big right now, but the rate of growth it's experiencing suggests that in the next couple of years, the overwhelming majority of users are all going to be on mobile. And obviously not necessarily users who are on the first world or users who even have laptops, but people who only have access to phones, for example. So it's something we try and kind of have a unified experience on, that everything that's possible to do on desktop is also possible to do on mobile.
Hannah, you've been involved since the early days, right? Were you like the first developer?
Suppose officially I was, yeah. John started talking to me around the same sort of time that he wrote his blog post about this idea for this new user interface for blogging. At the time we were talking about building a WordPress plugin that would completely replace the admin for WordPress. And I went away and built a little demo of how that would look, how that would work. And after about a day or two, I sent John some code, and that was the first iteration of Ghost, and it didn't work. So we tried again and decided to build our own thing.
I'm not gonna lie, those are my absolute favorites. Whenever we have people on here, my favorite stories are the ones where people say we tried something and it didn't work, so we had to do something else. I think those are the absolute best because it does show people that you're probably not going to get it 100% right on the first try.
Yeah, the best part of that story as well is I'd actually been soliciting for development help for, I don't know, weeks at that point. And there were so many people who said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I'd love to help based on this blog post I'd written. And Hannah I had like a 5-minute chat with. I was like, I'm looking for someone to help build this, but everyone's saying it's a great idea, but nobody wants to help. And she says 1 or 2 days. She sent me like a full plugin with the first version of the UI working in WordPress in under 24 hours. And I had a zip file called ghost.zip and an email attachment the next day. I was like, oh God, this is... help me more, because clearly you know how to work fast.
Do you still have it? Do you still have that original ghost.zip file?
I think I do somewhere, actually.
Yeah, I think it's probably on a Dropbox somewhere.
Yeah. Archive that stuff.
That's great. So, Hannah, have you done any UI or even backend for developing with other blog platforms prior to this?
No, I haven't worked on blog platforms unless you count, sort of writing scripts and plugins and God knows what else for WordPress. I've worked with WordPress pretty heavily, but no, I was working on, I built a lot of sites in WordPress, lots of complicated things, and also sort of working in e-commerce and all sorts of different areas, but mostly ended up working in JavaScript on the front end. And as JavaScript on the front end kind of grew into its own discipline, as the module packages came out and we started seeing bigger and bigger and bigger applications on the front end, I kind of just grew with that, and now I've sort of flipped it over to writing Node as well. So write JavaScript on the back end and the front end, and it's all in one language, and happy days.
So is that why you picked Node? Because you came from the JavaScript background?
Oh, it's one of many, many good reasons why we picked Node. We were looking to do something that's been done many, many times before in PHP. So did not want to do it again in PHP. It's just not going to be an interesting challenge. And Node seemed like the right language at the time. It was new and it was very, very, very fast, and has its approach to dealing with the things is so speedy and modern that it just seemed like the right approach, to take Node and go forward with that. And also the community was another big one. JavaScript community on GitHub and the meetups and all of that sort of JavaScript scene that you see around. Having to give up on WordPress and give up on the WordPress ecosystem was kind of sad, because there's a whole group of people there developing plugins and themes, and so like leaving that behind seemed like a sad thing to give up on. So knowing that we were going to move over into a JavaScript community where there were also a massive community of people who were working on all kinds of modules, themes, all sorts of things for JavaScript, and we thought we could position Ghost in that quite well, and that's worked out really well because our theme community grew really fast. Out of both the WordPress theming community and the JavaScript community, and different groups of people who are interested. And we're hoping to do the same with plugins and other sort of extensions for Ghost.
So what's been the feedback from other developers on GitHub? Have a lot of people volunteered their time to help out with the project?
I think we've got around 200 contributors that we've had so far. And I mean, we have varying degrees. We have people who have been with us for a long time who work on the platform regularly. We have lots of people who come in and do one or two things in an area where they're interested. We also have a number of volunteers who are what we call our core team. So they've been with us for long enough, and they've been dedicated and really involved in what we're doing. And so they have commit rights, and they're part of our team. Sort of they span between our company and the community. So yeah, we've got interesting and diverse range of people working on Ghost.
That's pretty awesome. Just a little bit of a sidebar about, so you say you have 200 or so contributors. How do you guys manage that much stuff coming in? And so I imagine you probably have a significant number of pull requests, at least weekly, and things like that. So how do you guys manage that a decent sized open source contributing community?
With a lot of Red Bull.
Yeah, it's challenging at times, and it can be challenging from the perspective that you get different people coming along contributing different things. Some people see our roadmap and see something they're really interested in, and they come and work on something that's really relevant to us, and so it can be quite easy to work with them to move things forward and to get pull requests merged. And other people come in and are just got their own idea of what Go should be or what it should look like, or they want to refactor something, and it's it can be outside of the realm of what we're thinking about at any particular time, and those pull requests can sit and languish. But the first year or so, it was just me merging pull requests all on my own, and that was fun, but time consuming. But like I said, we've now got a couple of people who are also have the commit rights, so they can also merge pull requests. So community members that come in and help, and they also review and merge. And we also have a weekly development meeting. So we have a weekly meeting where we talk about what we want to get done and what has gotten done, and talk about pull requests and if there's issues or blockers. So that can help, and anyone can come along to that, which is another way of moving things forward. And the other thing, I guess, is just sort of there's a lot of information out there. The GitHub repository is full of issues. The wiki is full of stuff. We've got a public roadmap, and we have the weekly development meetings which get written up as well. So it's really easy to get information about what it is that we're working on and what we're doing. So it makes it easy for other people to kind of fit into the community and kind of do things in a way that makes it easy to merge pull requests and easy to talk to them and that kind of thing.
It's also really interesting from a product point of view, looking at the closed source versus open source conundrum. Whereas in kind of a closed source team building or startup building a product, a software product, you set your roadmap. Everyone works on something together, and you go through your feature list and you build out stuff in a very kind of normal iterative process. But in an open source product and community, obviously, most people, almost everyone, is a volunteer, so you can't really force anyone to just come and work on the thing that's important to us as the leadership right now, because there's different skill sets, there's people who are interested in different things, and generally people are willing to give up their time to volunteer their development skills for something that they're interested in, but they're not that passionate about just coming in and doing work that they're not interested in for the sake of it. So what you end up doing is kind of setting out a rough roadmap and then having parallel lists of features that are available to be worked on. So rather than just having one feature that's being worked on right now, we have sort of 10 to 20 features that could be worked on right now if someone feels like picking them up. And that's a very, very different sort of development mindset to a standard software company, which makes it quite interesting in terms of the dynamics.
Yeah, you recently had a blog post about that on your personal blog, I believe, right?
I did, yeah. There's a couple.
Right, and the open source, the business of open source or open source business.
Yes.
So that was interesting to me because there's different companies and different models that way. Can you talk about how you guys are doing this versus how other companies are doing this? What are the two main groups, I guess, as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd observed sort of from all my prior work, the kind of existing models, the ones that seem to be propagated most commonly throughout the web or the world, if you will. And the one that obviously I was most familiar with was WordPress, which had this kind of open source product. That was the main focus, big open source community, and then on the side there was this big business, which in WordPress cases calls Automatic, and turns over lots and lots of money. But the open source product is the main focus, and then the business is kind of the secondary thing. The other common model is where you have closed source businesses, for example, Stripe or Airbnb or even GitHub to some extent, where the main product is closed source, and then they release bits of it as open source components. And both of those models have different dynamics. The closed source one tends to be just like a gratuitous, here's a module, take it, use it if you want, but no community ever really builds around it because it's just a module from a closed source thing. And the open source model, where there's a project and then a separate business, works far better. You get a big open source community, but it's very, very hard to build a business. And the biggest thing I saw from WordPress land in particular, and the similarities across Drupal and a few others, is there's always this big conflict of interest, and that was the thing that's always irked me the most, is when the people who are in charge of the open source project are also in charge of a business which has shareholders and has investors who demand a return, then the values of the open source project and the business tend to get intermingled and confused quite a lot, and you're never quite sure whether decisions are being made in the interest of the open source community or in the interest of the business, because both absolutely have equal demands and equal rights. So because neither of those models seem perfect, I had an idea to try and come up with a slightly new one, which is a bit more similar to Mozilla / Firefox's model, where we have a single non-profit organization which does make money by having a product. In our case, that's hosting. And have that same non-profit organization manage the open source project, so that any money the non-profit organization makes would only ever be able to be used to contribute to the project and make it better. And at the same time, all decisions then would be objective. At the time, it was just a pipe dream. 2 years later, it seems to be working pretty well. Makes everything a little bit harder to do. Obviously, we can't take investment or grow as fast as we'd like to. But we managed to hit profitability in 11 months. And now we're on steady growth.
That's awesome. And you said, trying to put a sentence together, you said that sometimes you don't know if things are being done in the interest of the company or for the open source community, and if anybody needs a good example, they can just look at Joyent with Node at the moment.
Right. That's a very good point.
The schism that is, I don't even really know if you would call it a schism, whatever the thing that's happening now with Node and I/O, but it's a very good example of where the open source community tried to take back Node, I guess, is a good way to put it. But so there are real world examples of these different models you were talking about, of trying to put things together, and you can see there kind of the pros and cons of the different ones. I mean, it sounds like you guys are doing awesome. Like I said, profitability in 11 months is pretty good.
Yeah, it's not too bad so far. Obviously, we'd always love to grow faster. We have so many contributors that we'd love to hire and be able to put on the full-time payroll to just keep doing what they're doing. But
Those
more
are
of
the slowest 11 months.
it. Yeah, felt like a lifetime.
So Hannah, what would you think as far as the code? Do you feel like that the front end or the back end of this project have been the most difficult to work with, or the easiest? And what are the particular pain points and excellent pieces of code that you're proud of?
Also, if you don't mind, just run down the stack real quick of what Ghost is built on.
Yeah, I was about to say it's kind of a tricky one with Ghost because talk about front end and back end, and Ghost is effectively two different applications. There is an admin user interface, which is client-side application, which is now written in Ember, and it is completely 100% in the browser. I've heard people say it's the most Ember-ish Ember app they've seen. It's written, the way that Ember is intended to be written, and so that's, we're both feet in with Ember on that side. And then on the other side, you've got the actual application that renders a blog. And that's what we call the front end, because it's the end that the users get to see, or the readers get to see. But it's actually a server-side application that just renders HTML on the server and sends it out as static HTML. And the intention of that is that you would cache that side of things, because you want your blog to load really, really fast, and it's just static content. It's text, and it doesn't need to be all whizzy and interactive like an Ember app would be. So those two things are completely separate, and they are joined in the middle by another piece of server-side code, which is it's all in the same code base, but it's a separate thing again almost, which is our API. And the JSON API is sat there in the middle. It talks to the database through an ORM called Bookshelf, and that allows us to use or offer both SQLite and MySQL and even Postgres if you prefer. So you can choose which database you want to use with Ghost. And that entire layer of API, which talks to models, which talks to the database, is just like another separate thing. And both the front end of Ghost, or the actual blog that's rendered, gets its data through the JSON API, and the admin client that's written in Ember also talks to the JSON API. So we dog food our own JSON API really heavily. So that's the stack. And then templating everything's handlebars, which is really, really important because handlebars is awesome. And just simplifies everything and keeps, it sort of has a really great impact on the theme API and on making things really nice to use. So those are our main pieces, and then we've got Express in there and other bits and pieces. As for what was hardest, it's kind of, it's kind of flip-flopping. Originally, the admin UI was written in Bookshelf, in Backbone. And Backbone is a lovely framework, and I had some experience with it, but it doesn't make many decisions for you. It leaves you a lot of work to do to join all the pieces together. And so what we ended up with, lots of different pieces joined together in lots of different ways, and not really a cohesive experience, which is not very good for open source, because you want people to be able to come in and understand the code base and just get started with it. And it also, when you end up in that situation where you've got lots of different things happening in lots of different ways, it just becomes hard to manage, hard to build on. And that also constituted to the problem that John was talking about earlier, where we had this little post settings menu UI that was tiny and wasn't extensible, and it was all done with Backbone, and it was all, we couldn't really go anywhere with it. And so last year, I think it was February last year now, we decided that we needed to rewrite the entire admin UI completely, and we asked a very dangerous question of what should we use? Should we use Backbone? Should we use Ember? Or should we use Angular? And I kind of started this issue on GitHub, with some trepidation.
I would imagine there's several hundred comments on that one.
There are around 100, and it was very explicitly stated in the opening sort of issue that what the problems were with our existing solution. So what we wanted to solve, and that what we wanted were people's experiences that were related to these issues and not opinion, and that if you posted a pure opinion, it would be deleted, just to try and keep the flaming down. And what we ended up with was actually people from all of the different platforms, actual developers of those platforms, coming in and contributing and saying where their platform was strong and weak and how it would solve the problems that we had and how it wouldn't. And so it ended up being a really great discussion in which it became really, really clear that our fundamental problem was that we needed consistency. We wanted decisions to be made up front. We didn't want to have to be thinking about how to put pieces together, and that's why Ember was a natural fit, because it makes all of those decisions for you. It has a way to do things, and it's turned out great. It took us a while to rewrite it, but now we've got this massively extensible admin, and it's really easy to pick something up and make it work differently or pull it in a new direction. Yeah,
that's definitely pretty cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please keep going.
No, it's fine. That was the end.
Okay, all right. But that was the next part I was going to ask, is why you decided to go with Ember over Angular, and specifically with an open source project, because Ember seems to have a curve, and this is great for people that are listening on audio, but has this curve where Ember has a very steep learning curve, at least for me. Had a very steep learning curve at the beginning, but then after you get it, that you have that light bulb moment, and you're like, okay, and then everything is done the same. You know the data is coming from the route. You know where your actions are going. It's all, like you said, you don't have to make any decisions because it's all laid out for you. Where Angular is much easier to get started because they're like, let's just throw filters and bind things everywhere, and then you start to get into the weeds a little bit, and you're like, oh crap, and then you have to go back and redo things.
And then you start having to think about patterns and how you're going to do something, and that was where we were with Backbone. So we didn't want that again. We tried that, and it hadn't worked.
Yeah.
And the learning curve for Ember is really interesting because I'm still at the bottom of it. I've got a rough idea of how the pieces are supposed to go together, but every time you sit down and try and build something, you have to, pour over documentation and try and figure out what the Embery way of doing it is.
Yeah.
But at the very least, it's there. It's written out.
Yeah,
somebody's done it for you on Stack Overflow.
Absolutely. Where would we be without Stack Overflow? Yeah, I mean that whole project is really cool. I actually started with Ember and then ended up moving over to Angular, and I still like both a lot, but I find myself sometimes trying to use the same conventions in Angular that you do in Ember, which you can do, but you have to enforce them yourself. It's almost like a statically typed language versus a dynamically typed language, where Ember, this is how it's done, and in Angular, this is how you can do it.
Yep.
But I can see how that would be much more comfortable in an open source community as well, where then it's much easier to enforce style because it's already laid out for you.
Yeah, I was just about to say, when people come into our Ember app, they can read it instantly and know where everything is because it's exactly the same as every other Ember app. The biggest thing that we see, and we've seen over and over again from talking to Angular people and Angular projects, is one team can know your Angular app inside out, but as soon as you go to a new Angular app and try and work on that, you have to relearn the whole thing of where all the pieces are and where they fit together, because there's no parity between the two. And from a closed source point of view, maybe Angular is more flexible, but from an open source point of view, we can get so many more developers in the door because they've already had the exact same experience, even file structure, in different projects. And the advantage of that is almost there's no way to really fully appreciate it or explain it.
Yeah.
Especially now with Ember CLI, like our application looks identical to any other Ember application. You know exactly where to go to find each and every possible part of the application. So yeah, it really reduces the barrier to entry as long as you have that knowledge of Ember.
Yeah.
So that's the only prerequisite.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys got to use Ember CLI, because it's still fairly beta-ish at the moment, I think.
So we are very lucky in that some of the people who work on Ember and Ember CLI use the Ghost project as their guinea pig.
Ah, fantastic.
So we tend to get the latest and greatest Ember features before they're really in Ember, when they're still hidden away a little bit. And the same with Ember CLI. We've had our project switch over. One of our core contributors did it with help from somebody from Ember CLI. So we switched over actually just a couple of weeks ago, and it'll be switched over in the next release of Ghost. It's all going really well so far, and yeah, there's definitely a lot to be gained from the new structure, from the fact that it's just absolutely the same as everything else. Everyone else has got the same structure and the same layout.
How frequently do you update Ember?
Like I say, the guys that work on Ember come and do it every time there's a major update, especially if there's something that's a breaking change, they come and sort us out. So quite frequently, I think it gets updated in almost every release.
That's awesome. It's really good to hear. Sorry for everybody listening. There seems to be a little bit of a echo. Oh, there it goes. Awesome. Live podcasting, the best.
Woohoo!
Yeah. That's very cool. I think because I think you guys are some of the first that we've had on here that are real big that are real big Ember fans that are using it in a large scale application, which is pretty great. Because like I said, I've dabbled in both, and we're actually going to at Deloitte Digital. I think we're actually working on, with all the Angular 2.0 stuff coming out, we're going to reevaluate if we want to keep going with Angular 2 since it is different, or if we want to move back over towards the Ember side, because we started with Ember and moved to Angular, and now we're going to kind of reevaluate, because I know they're working on a lot of stuff like their new Glimmer engine. For rendering, which for anybody that doesn't know, they should go read about it. But it's works very similar to the way that React works, and things like Famous with Virtual DOM and stuff like that. But the nice thing is that you guys will get with your Ember app will get that stuff right away. There's no porting that has to be done. You just update Ember and you have all of the things already, which is pretty nice.
Yep, and I mean Ember has already, since we started using it last year, changed quite significantly a number of times. It's a really fast-moving, fast-growing application and platform, and yeah, we just sort of, like I say, we get informed of or helped to make those changes every time it changes, and yeah, so Ghost is evolving and growing and getting better and better and better as Ember does, and they're kind of like sister projects. They work well together.
As far as like the node part of it too, do you think that you have issues with dependencies at all, and also security as well? Are there problems with that?
There are always problems. There are always going to be little problems. So far, I found the npm and the whole node dependency system to work really, really well for us. We keep all of our dependencies pinned, and now we ship with a shrink wrap so that we don't get dodgy dependency updates in the middle, which we have had a couple of problems with in the past, but only on the developer dependency side. So those sorts of dependencies tend to move a bit faster. So that means that
having them pinned is such a great idea. I'm finding now working with web components too. It's it moves so quickly that if you pin those dependencies, it'll save you a lot of pain.
Yeah, and you can choose to go and do an update when you're ready, or when there's a feature that you want to go and grab. But yeah, so we've had a couple of issues with dependencies, and they've all been around the build. So you have to build Ghost to make it work, and all of our releases are all pre-built, so it only affects you if you want to build it yourself from source. So far, the dependencies haven't been too much of an issue. As for security, there are always little niggles here, there, and everywhere that people pick up on, little XSS injection or whatever. And so far, we've been really lucky with having people report these really responsibly, and we just get them fixed and get them a new release pushed out. But I wouldn't say that I don't think Node has provided us with any particular security risks over and above anything else.
Well, Express in particular, the defaults are not so secure, but you can make Express very secure. So it's one of the things that I usually ask with the Express applications. What's the setup basically for the security? But I mean, Node is really secure, except that because it moves so quick, like if you've ever been to, I forget, what is it? Adam Baldwin has a site, Node Security. And every release, there's always some new security issues with it. So are you guys keeping up with that?
There's the Node Security project, and you can audit your dependencies, and I tend to run that before I do a release. So I run their tool, which
Excellent.
tells me if any of our dependencies have got a new vulnerability in them, and if they are, we update or we do whatever we can to mitigate the problem while somebody else sorts it out. You're always in some nested dependency tree, but so far we've managed to always managed to work around it. But no, we do use those tools.
Excellent. That's great.
Yeah. So, so what is your? So you just said so it does have to build. At least I said the front end at least has to build if you're using Ember CLI because it's using. I don't remember which ES6 transpiler it's using, but I know it's using a ES6 transpiler, which is pretty cool. But
Pretty
what
cool.
does what does your all's build like your all's build system look like? Just from a rough overview. Like, are you using Jenkins? Are you using Travis?
So we use Travis for running our tests. So we've got that hooked up to GitHub. Every pull request gets run for a massive test suite, which builds against now Node 10, Node 12, and IOJS. So we're doing loads and loads of testing on that side, and then the actual build system is all written in Grunt. Use Grunt to talk to Ember to do the Ember builds, and the rest of it is just basically copying all of the files you actually need into a directory and zipping them up. It's nothing more complicated than that, and so just a Grunt task.
Cool. So what does so if somebody wants to get started with Ghost, how does it get? Do they just download the zip file of the latest release and deploy to the server, or do you guys have like an install process or something like that?
Download the latest zip file, unpack it, npm install, and then npm start. Job done.
And then Ghost.
Yeah, then you are ghosted. It's all done.
Or even better option is to just go to ghost.org and use the Pro managed hosting platform, which manages to fund the future of the project, and you don't have to npm install anything. That's like the super fast way. 3 clicks and you're there.
Awesome. That's great. It's good to have options. Are there I actually meant to ask this before, with it being an open source project. I'm not on the GitHub page right now. Are there a lot of forks of Ghost?
A lot of people have forked it in terms of developing on it, and people do manage their own forks with minor updates and changes or bug fixes that they want to merge in early. But I'm not really aware of any major competing forks, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, even not necessarily competing, but if somebody forked Ghost to, I don't know, like you were saying, open source communities, some people have different opinions for the way that things should be going. If there was somebody that was like, well, I kind of want to do it a different way instead, and just ended up taking whatever snapshot of Ghost looked at the moment and manages something else in their own way.
I think we're probably too early in Ghost's life cycle for stuff like that. Or it happens to pretty much every open source project at some point down the line, but I think we're still in such early days that there's not enough there to be worth forking for someone else to split off and want to do.
That's fair
Probably.
enough. It's never too early.
I mean, obviously, with the server-side rendering, you're going to get great SEO, and you would get it anyway. I think with once Google and the other search engines start implementing different things, so that SEO happens after JavaScript is rendered. But for now, it's like very, very good SEO. But as far as analytics, like how can people track what they're doing and their visitors and all that? Do you guys have stuff for that on the hosting platform, or is there stuff built into the project?
It's kind of like Hannah was saying, with the two apps being completely separate. The only thing that's powered by Ember and rendered by JavaScript is the back end, so where you actually log in and do your writing. But the blog itself and all the content is static HTML rendered by Node, so that behaves just the same as any other website. So it's fully search engine crawlable, it's fully Google Analyticable. That's not a word, but it is now. It's completely as normal, really. So there's no major problems with doing anything that you're used to doing on any other platform, really.
Well, I wouldn't expect that there would be. I guess my question was a little vague, maybe. I didn't know if there's anything built in for analytics.
Not yet, but we're planning on that.
We have there's a user interface inside
Nice.
of Ghost in the labs page where you can go and paste your snippet in, from Google Analytics, and it'll load it on every page for you. So there are tools to work with it. And the entirety of the front end of your blog is, although it's done on the server side, the code that is run to render your blog is your theme, which you choose or build yourself. So if you want to code in some scripts to do Google Analytics or whatever you want, you just whack it in your theme, job done.
And how do you go about making these themes, and what's the best place? Is there a registry that people should go to get those?
Marketplace.ghost.org is our current home for them. That's the place to go and get them. There's also a lot of them on ThemeForest. There's hundreds on ThemeForest, I think. And then as for going and making your own, then there is an entire suite of documentation at themes.ghost.org, which sort of runs through the process of how to create one and all of the helpers and tools.
Cool. You mentioned you guys also talked earlier about so you both came from working a lot with WordPress and the community around WordPress and plugins. And I know you said that you want to start incorporating, or probably already are incorporating, plugins of some sort into Ghost. So is that something that you guys have now, or are you building like an elegant plugin system for people to work with?
The system, we started building it last year, and there are pieces of it in place. And if you're really, really smart, you can probably use it. As there's no documentation for it or anything. So it's still very, very much a work in progress, and we are trying to build out a suite of really comprehensive tools for building what we call apps for Ghost, where you can hook in and do pretty much anything you want to modify Ghost internals without ever having to touch core. But yeah, it's very much a work in progress still. I think there are a couple of little things that you can achieve with it, but not much.
That's cool. That's something that's definitely. I know you've also said before, still very early on, all that kind of stuff. But it's really good to know that stuff is coming, because that will be I think that will be a really big piece once it's in place. And you said you already have the themes, and I imagine you'll have just as big of a community around plugins and things like that. If nothing else, as soon as it launches, people porting WordPress plugins over to Ghost.
Yeah,
that's one thing I was going to ask about. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Hannah.
No, go.
I was going to ask, like I saw on the GitHub for TryGhost, there was a couple of repos. One that was like an importer for WordPress, but there wasn't much in it, and there was a exporter for to get JSON from an existing blog. So if I make a blog on like Medium or some other platform, or even just WordPress, is there plans to have those integration points?
Definitely. We've got a few tools there at the moment. We've got just about enough that you can get your blog from one place to another, but not necessarily easily. The main thing that we've got at the moment is a WordPress plugin, which you install into your WordPress blog, and then it will export all of your content in a format that Ghost understands. And Ghost has had a built-in importer and exporter since day one. It has its own, just a plain JSON representation of its database that it can understand. It can import that content, and it can spit it back out again. And it can also import images, and it can also import markdown files and just turn those into posts for you. So there are a couple
So
of
it stores them as link references in the application?
No, it takes the markdown files and it converts them into posts in the database.
Cool.
So we've got a few tools there that are internal, and then externally there are a number of projects that have popped up converting Tumblr, WordPress, WXR files, and Blogger as well, taking content from those and turning them into Ghost's JSON format. But we always intended to have when we had an app system, to have an app where you could just install the right importer for your blog and pull from that platform, rather than having to go to that platform and push the content to Ghost, as it were.
I have I know we're starting to bump up against our time, but before we did, I wanted to ask one more kind of just geeky thing. What do you guys use for testing? So do you do so like what do you use for your unit testing stuff, for front end and back end? What kind of end-to-end tests are you running? That kind of stuff.
Ghost test suite is quite large and varied. So most things are driven off Mocha. in some way, shape, or form. We have a suite of functional tests which use Casper.js built on top of Phantom.js. So that runs the Ember admin client through some basic tests to make sure that every page is rendering roughly correctly, got all the right things on it. We also have the Ember CLI style unit tests, which Ember unit tests only used to do QUnit until we said that we wouldn't use them if they use QUnit. So they now work on Mocha as well. So we have those in there. And then we also have unit tests with just Mocha and should. We have a set of other sort of integration tests which use super tests. So we test the API and various endpoints that way as well, sort of sending off requests and making sure we get the right response back. Tons of different types of tests going on, and yeah, our build takes a while, but we like to make sure things are tested. As, gone are the days. I think the first 3 releases I manually tested every possible thing you could do with Ghost, which back then took maybe an hour.
A little bit more time now, maybe?
Now I don't. I think it would take me a week. So yeah, lots of tests.
Yeah. So how I have a guy that I work with, actually one of my bosses at Deloitte Digital. His name's Aaron Drock. I actually hope we're gonna get him on this podcast at some point. But he gives me crap now because we have one project that we're working on that they said you have to run it through with a Node backend, Angular front end, and it has to run through all of its stuff, runs through all of its unit tests, and so like I'll fire off a build and I'll go away. Because it takes it a little bit to go, and he always gives me crap because he said he still can't get used to a build process for JavaScript applications. He's an old Java guy, so they're nowhere close to like the 45 to 45 minute Java builds, but still take enough time for you to step away and maybe get coffee or something.
Yeah, I'll take 5 to 10 to run them locally, and then to run through the different iterations on Travis can take half an hour or so, depending on how nice Travis is being on that day. But I do find that same attitude is quite prevailing. Like the number of people that we get who check out our GitHub repository and try and use it without doing anything to it, because it's just JavaScript, right? So what would you need to do? And to point out that if they want to use the GitHub repository, they have to run all the grunt tasks. And if they don't want to do that, there are loads of zip files available. It's a really common one, and I think it really does like screw with people's brains that what's in the repository is the source code, not the build.
Yeah, it's true, but you can definitely see what they're coming from, where they're coming from. But
absolutely, but source code doesn't mean the same in JavaScript as it does in any other programming language.
That's true. I actually never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right.
I have to say too, like I know Chris Smith is not on the podcast now, but he's also a co-host. He built the read the source site with a static generator called Hugo, and it's in Go. And wow, the build is so fast. Like even with you could put in thousands and thousands of pages, and it's super fast.
Well, when there are a couple blog posts that they said that the guys at Google wrote Go while they were waiting for their Java applications to compile. So that was supposed to be one of the points. I don't know if that's. But again, if you're at Google and you have enormous Java applications, it probably did take 45 minutes or so. So you probably do have time to do something else. But that is supposed to be one of the points of Go. So it's actually I'll have to talk to Christian about it because I've not actually talked to somebody that's actually done anything. Cool. I guess we're starting to bump up against our time now. So, Eric, you got anything else you want to ask?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, can you guys give us a quick overview of the roadmap and how people can contribute to that roadmap in the future?
John, do you want to talk about it, or shall I?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, the easiest. We don't have a. You know what we should do? Did we make a short link for the roadmap? Is it like bit.ly ghost-roadmap or something?
It might be. Let me check. We should have done that.
On the fly check. If we haven't done that, let's do that. But no, we're up to all kinds of things this year. Obviously the biggest project towards the end of the year, or throughout the year, and hopefully finished towards the end of the year, in some way, shape, or form is going to be to have apps and integrations with third-party services starting to run in Ghost. It's the #1 most requested feature that there is. If you're listening to this and you use Ghost and you have ideas for things it should do, check out ideas.ghost.org, which is a user voice forum where you can see what features are being requested and vote on the ones which sound good for you. Apps is definitely a big focus for this year. We're also going to be doing a lot of design revisions for the admin UI as we've figured out some of those conventions I was talking about earlier, which haven't worked so well, and start to replace them with new ones which are a little bit more extensible. So a lot of design work in admin is going to come this year, and I think apps is probably going to be the biggest backend project for the year. But by all means, hopefully Hannah is going to give you the roadmap link to add to the show notes.
Yeah, I will do. And I guess internally, we were talking about having rewritten the entire of the admin client in Ember, which has obviously gone fantastically. So I think one of the big things that's going to happen this year is a big rewrite of the sort of the generation code for blogs themselves to make that more extensible and flexible, ready for apps. So that's also something that's, well, it's high on my excitement list. I don't think there are many other people that would be excited about it, but I'm looking forward to it.
All the things.
Yeah.
No, that sounds awesome. There's nothing quite as good as a good rewrite. It's very therapeutic.
Yeah, my favorite thing is a good refactor that gets rid of most of the code.
I just last week I rolled off one project and back onto another larger one, and it was one of the biggest Angular app we've built to this point, and I think I've ripped out 6 controllers at this point, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely thrilled. Like, I do comparisons of how big the finished dist file, distributable file was before and how big it is now. It makes me really happy.
Nothing better than deleting code.
Yes.
Except for adding features whilst deleting code. Yeah, that's always
Oh my God, it's like, not only does this do things it didn't do before, there's also less of it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Well, we're definitely a little over time, so thank you guys for coming. If people want to get in touch with you, can they get you on Twitter or GitHub, or where should they find you? How should they contact you to talk about this or contribute to the project?
Yeah, Twitter, GitHub, Ghost IRC channel, everywhere that you could expect to find us, you'll find us, I think.
Okay. And what's your Twitter handles?
I am at John O'Nolan, JOHNONOLAN.
And I am at ErisDS, that's ERISDS.
And we will also put these things in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Definitely.
You can
Well,
always
thank you guys
tweet at Trighost and Trighost Dev as well.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to post the marketplace and the ideas links in the show notes as well. That's some good stuff there.
Cool.
So thank you guys. We really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you guys very, very much. It was a blast talking to you guys, and it's pretty exciting to see where Ghost is going.
Thanks very much.
Yep. Thank you. Goodbye, guys.